Nope.
Hey, how
Hello.
are you? How you doing?
I am well. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Good. I think we have you sideways here.
Okay, well, let me see if I can fix myself.
Okay.
Now,
There we go. Okay, I just made you a co-host.
all right.
So that way you have control over the same things I do if you want it.
Great. No, I just was going to ask you what kind of superpowers I got with it.
Yeah, that's well, I think you can you might be able to unmute people. So as of right now, I have it set up, everybody will be muted when they come on. I'm also going to ask them, they shouldn't be able to unmute themselves, but I will ask everybody to keep it muted until the end. Questions I'm asking for everybody to put into the chat, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
And then we, at the end, so I'm thinking maybe 7:40. What do you think about time for questions?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not a long talker by design, so I just kind of, I don't think I'll take a long time saying what I'd like to say, and then whatever time you want to dedicate for questions is fine with me. I generally don't get a ton of questions, for some reason, and I think one of the emails mentioned if anyone had any follow-up questions, who a good point of contact would be. And I'm happy to provide my information. So Denise can get that over to you. And if anybody has any questions, they can just call me.
Okay, that was my next question. I was going to ask you if that at the end, if it's okay if I tell them if they have another question that they haven't asked or something we didn't have time to address, if I could gather all those, send them to you, and then say that you will, or you or a member of your team will contact them.
Yeah, absolutely. You send them to me and we'll get them answered.
Okay,
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's see. Oh, here comes it, Denise. The other thing I wanted to know is, as far as the view, would you rather it just be, hi Denise. Would you rather it just be the speaker that's view, or would you like to see everybody on one screen as you're talking?
Oh, that sounds really busy.
It is.
Because I think there's like 57 people that were invited. I don't need to see everybody, but I mean, I'll do whatever.
Okay. There was actually, in total about 700 people that were invited.
Oh, well, I don't need to see 700 people. So it's really tiny boxes.
I don't think 700 will come, but yes, just so you know, there it could be 10, it could be a lot.
Yeah. But the alternative is I have to actually watch myself speak. And that's also, I'm like, oh, it's trade-off.
Yeah. Maybe turn off your screen.
Yeah. That's a good
I have the same issue. I look elsewhere, but yes.
Yeah, I do that.
Okay. All right. And then other than that, we have a waiting room set up, so everybody will be in that. Another person from our board, Andrew Skinner, will be here to allow people in. If I'm speaking or you're speaking, we can't get to them, so they can join at any time.
Great.
And that's about it. I mean, the rest is your floor. So however you want it.
Yep. No worries. I'm good. So I'll just shut off my camera till 6:59-ish.
Sure.
All right. Awesome. Thanks.
Jessica, did you need me to speak?
One more.
Okay, we have quite a few in the waiting room now. I'm going to go ahead and let them in, and if you don't mind, Agent Santiago, maybe we'll give it another like 2 minutes just to allow everybody to get here.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Okay. Welcome to all of those who have joined. We're just waiting another couple of minutes just to give others time to get in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. It is 7:02. Good evening and welcome to Interfaith Atlanta's special session on crime prevention in Atlanta communities, specifically those related to violence and hate. As we prepare to get started, I ask all attendees to please keep your devices muted. If you have questions for our guest speaker, whom I will introduce in just a couple of minutes, please type them in the chat and we will address as many as possible at the end of this session. I am Jessica Matadine, Interfaith Atlanta's Executive Director, and I will be your host for this evening. So it's now a pleasure for me to introduce our guest speaker, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Alex Santiago, with whom Interfaith Atlanta has a relationship through our membership in the FBI's Community Engagement Council. This council was formed in response to the acknowledgement that relationship challenges do exist between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. But through our shared cultural heritage and experiences, our voice community and law enforcement perspective, we hope to demystify false narratives, reduce fear, discuss potential bias, and develop solutions that have a positive impact on our communities. And now, without any further delay, Agent Santiago.
Yeah, good evening. So first, I'd like to introduce, I think our acting special agent in charge of the Atlanta division is on the call this evening, and he'd like to say a few words. So Phil Whistler, the floor is yours. Okay, so he may be having trouble logging on. He texted me before the meeting saying that he was having some trouble. So I'll go ahead and take it from here. My name's Alex Santiago. I'm an assistant special agent in charge of the Atlanta field office. All that means is that the division is divided up into 6 branches, and I oversee one of the 6 branches. And I'm also one of 6 second in charge in the Atlanta division, and the special agent in charge is in charge of the Atlanta division, and the Atlanta division covers the entire state of Georgia. I'm just going to go through a couple of discussion points real quick, and then after that, of course, open up for the floor for any questions or comments from you all. So we'll start out by saying the community outreach program falls under me. It was designed to help create and strengthen relationships just locally and nationally with different racial, minority, and religious groups. The hopes that these relationships would give us an opportunity to further be able to protect the public from all sorts of threats, and just like what was said earlier, demystify any whatever stigma attached to any type of law enforcement organizations. So we offer outreach resources, information for community awareness, And those are produced at our operational divisions, Officer of Partner Engagement, Office of Private Sector, and our community relations at the headquarters level. And those can be provided by email. I want to say that all of us at the FBI are very relieved of the hostage situation that occurred in Colleyville, Texas. And that very thankful that it was resolved without any physical injury to anyone taken hostage. At the FBI, we never lose sight of the threat extremists pose, not just to Jewish communities, but to other religious, racial, and ethnic groups. And it is our mission set to stop and thwart those threats. We have a close enduring relationship, not with just the Jewish community affected in that attack, but all communities, facilitated by calls, facilitated by calls and meetings just like these all over the country. Right now, as I'm having a conversation with you, my colleagues in big divisions all over the country are having very similar conversations with interfaith groups in their areas. Preventing acts of terrorism and violence is the #1 priority of the FBI, period. The threats that we currently see are complex and evolving. They're no longer the standard threats where we can put them in silos years ago. They tend to commingle with other threats. Actors tend to commingle with other actors and becomes more complicated to address those threats. But again, that's our mission set. So one of the things at the FBI that we're very cognizant of is that members of a faith community should never be fearful of worshiping in their houses of worship. They should always feel safe attending those houses of worship anytime during the week without any fear of attack. Preparation, conversations, relationships, that's what's key to preventing attacks like the one we saw in Texas. So in conclusion, I'm just going to kind of lay out a couple of things that are really more on the pragmatic side of it. We talk about relationships and we talked about demystification, and all those are so important. What does it really mean? What does that mean between the FBI, between Alex Santiago, as I sit in front of you today, and you on the other end of the call? So at the end of the call today, if you have any questions or anything at all, you're going to get my contact information. You're going to get my phone number. You're going to get my email address. What does that mean? Well, one, I want to be a point of contact and a reference for any questions you might have. And not just that, not just questions, but also a relationship. I am open if you want to reach out to me to begin a relationship, to begin a dialogue. And what does that do? That begins more of a comfort level between our organizations. One of the things that our organization is more open to do now than I've seen in the last 10, 15 years is to share information. What we do really well now that we've had to mature as an organization into is providing the relevant information to those that are threatened so that they can protect themselves. Or in the case of Interfaith Atlanta, protect the congregation. How do we do that? What does that look like? So if there's a threat to the community and a specific threat, we're poised to reach out to that specific community, go out to them and have conversations about the threat that exists, and co-opt, be able to partner in a way that we can both not only advance the protection of your community, but also advance our investigation. I've done this personally previously when I worked out of the Dallas division. And again, we do this better than we have in a long time. The other thing we're doing better now than we did years ago, was opening ourselves up for communications. We have very good, enduring one-on-one personal relationships with a lot of different communities in the area. And we want to continue that. Calls like these are so important. And I appreciate the fact that all of you are taking time away from your jobs, especially in the evening from your families, your wives, your children, to get on this call because it's so important. And we're willing to do the same. We hope that calls like these, conversations like these, are springboards into a more cemented relationship in the future. Another thing I'll add is that the public, you all, are our most critical asset to thwarting these threats. You see at the ground level what I don't see from the inside of my office in Chamblee. And what I encourage all of you is that when you see something, when you hear something, and I do it too, we have that little moment where you're like, should I call? Should I not call? I don't want to bother somebody. I don't want to seem, silly. Whatever it is that keeps you from making that call, I ask you, overcome that and call me, call us, and then let us tell you, oh, it's nothing. But in the event that is something, you're going to be so glad you called, and so are we. So, and again, these calls are just critical to, in the end, fostering that kind of relationship between us and all the different faith communities in Atlanta. I'll pause for a minute. I know I've said a lot, and I'll kind of open it up for any questions about anything I just covered.
Please feel free to vocalize your question in this meeting or type it in the chat, and I will read it out for you. If you have a question, if you have a comment about something that Agent Santiago has said, all is welcome right now for open communication. Okay, we have a question now. Do you speak to individual faith communities as well?
Yes, and to be honest with you, I'll speak with anyone who will give me a minute and an audience. I think the message that we carry is so important, but at the end of the day, we seek to establish relationships. So yes, individual faith communities, interfaith communities, anyone that will give us an audience, we're eager to step in, have a discussion, and form a relationship with.
And I have a question that I know has come up at a couple of our CEC meetings, is that how would you encourage those who might otherwise be hesitant to call law enforcement when they see something that may or may not be a threat or be a crime?
Yeah, so one, it's easier to call a friend than a stranger. And I think we all can relate to that. Again, part of me coming on tonight and hopefully being able to come back again and just reinforce this message is that if you, for example, if you see something tomorrow, I want to just give you the comfort, give you the confidence to reach out to me and call me. I would just encourage you not to be hesitant, and then let us kind of be the deciders of what might be a crime and what wouldn't. But at the end of the day, I'm hoping that relationships that are established through these type of calls, really at the end of the day, is what carries folks to make that phone call, vice being hesitant to do so.
Thank you. Next question, are there any trainings that you can recommend for the protection of places of worship? If so, what would that look like? Yeah, so, and I'll punt this to Denise Tace. We have a situational awareness training. I think it's February 22nd, and I'll pause for a minute. Denise, can you talk to that?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Denise Tace, the Community Outreach Specialist here for the FBI in Atlanta. We have a situational awareness for houses of worship training coming up on Tuesday, February 22nd at the Church of the Apostles. All of the information has been given to Jessica, and I believe she has began to disseminate and or will disseminate. If you're interested in attending, there is an email address where you can register for that symposium. And it is in partnership with our Department of Homeland Security. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Denise.
So, Alex, I have a question. As part of the Jewish community here in Atlanta, you know, we have an organization which is the Jewish Federation, and they have a security team that provides some training as well as advice, and they will come out and do sort of a security audit of your grounds and such like that. Are you also in contact with them so that we don't have to have multiple contacts? Because that's typically who we sort of go through, not to make a call that something's happening, but information that's, if something's going on in the country, for example, in some place, it's usually the Federation that contacts us to say, hey, there's some sort of alert going on and such like that, rather than direct from you guys. So I'm assuming there's some connection between the FBI and the security team. And I imagine a similar thing must exist with other faith organizations in Atlanta.
Yeah, Denise, can you touch on that for me, please?
I'd be glad to. Yes, Neil Rabinovitz is on our Community Engagement Council, and we do have a great working relationship with him. I have had the opportunity to sit through several of the trainings that you are describing, and he also partners with us to get the message out. And as many trainings as we can have, the better, I believe, that it will be for these different situations. But yes, in answer to your question, we're in a great relationship with Neil. Back to you, sir.
Right, thank you. Unfortunately, I missed the training he was doing yesterday, which was on this topic. But yes, I know he's been offering it, and maybe he'll be running it again.
I have a comment here that addresses the issue of, I suppose, discomfort of calling law enforcement when you're not quite sure of the outcome. They want me to share thoughts about your desire to be open, warm, and welcoming while being wary as a worship center. How do you do that?
Yeah, so I can tell you how Alex Santiago does that. It's all a part of being human. At the end of the day, it's interesting because I joined this organization. I had this kind of view of what the FBI was from the outside in. And then you get in this organization and you realize, hey, it's just a bunch of people that have the same people stuff that I have. And at the end of the day, it comes down to our ability to make relationships. It's our, and like anything else, your ability to show empathy, to listen, to be able to kind of sit and maybe kind of unpack some things that are relevant. So the short of it is, I think we do that really well. We want to do that really well. And what we're hoping is the idea of, again, just circling back to the idea of relationship. You can't establish relationships by being cold and distant. And so we certainly don't want to be that as we, again, try to further our relationships with the different communities.
And how does, or how do the individual worship centers or communities, how do they be discerning, but also be open and welcoming as they would like to be? What would you suggest?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that one of the reasons we established a community outreach program is to do exactly that. And so what I would recommend is have a conversation with our community outreach folks. Denise runs an incredible program at FBI Atlanta. I would probably begin that process by having a conversation when it's not passing information, and establishing a relationship when there's really no threat at that time. And then that way, when there is a threat, there is information that you can provide or somebody needs to provide on a threat, that relationship is already warm and that call is easy. If that makes sense.
Yeah, if I may ask a question, and then I think we can address what my colleague Reverend Flippin is asking in the chat. But what happened in Colleyville was that a rabbi, a colleague of mine, invited someone in because he came to the door in need and appeared to be in need and offered him tea and so forth and so on. Not really different than what most of us, I believe, in houses of worship would do when we see someone in need. at what point does the red flag kind of go up? And as Jessica is asking, and has been articulated by Mark Jacobson at the temple, like at what point do you say, if it's a stranger and I don't recognize them, I'm gonna have to ask a series of questions or confront them or press a button? Should we all have a button? Should we have our phones on speed dial to the, and then what your number, Alex, or a 911? It's just, that's the challenge, is that discernment. And, I think, I don't know if there's a good recipe for that, but that's what a lot of us want to know.
Yeah, so there really is not a good recipe for that. We deal with that challenge not so much in the situation in Colleyville, but in other dire situations where the red flag goes up, and at which point do we react or do we delay? And again, like for us, there's no cut and dry answer either. But yeah, no, I understand. That's a tough question to answer.
Hey, Alex, this is Phil. I couldn't unmute earlier, but I wanted to jump in if you can indulge me for a minute, because
Yeah,
I'd
of
like
course.
to add to that. I'd like to add to your response there. Good evening, everyone. My name is Philip Whistler. I'm the acting special agent in charge here in Atlanta. Upon Chris Hacker's retirement, some of you who may have known Chris and had worked with him over the last 3.5 years as he was our special agent in charge will know Chris to be a very engaging and very thoughtful leader, and not only in the FBI, but in our community as a whole. And we maintain that culture here in the Atlanta FBI office, even upon Chris's retirement, because he was such a force here. We're really excited to continue to have these engagements. Of course, we much prefer, as we all do, to be in person and to be together. And this is another way to unify around a very concerning topic and epidemic throughout the world. And it's not only geared towards violent acts, but violent acts that may not result in injury, but violent acts of hatred that are communicated in different ways that cause fear and intimidation in the religious community. And all of those are just as important. If you'll give me a minute just to reflect on how this has touched every faith and community really throughout the world. I mean, we have the Emmanuel African American Methodist Episcopal Church in 2015, the Dylan Roof shooting, which many people remember. We had the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018. We had the mosque attacks in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2015, First Baptist Church in Sutherland, Texas in 2017, a Sikh Temple of Wisconsin in 2012. And then, this last 2 weekends ago in Colleyville, Texas, another attack that resulted in hostages being able to be rescued because they were prepared and they had a plan. And I know that I only touched on a few of these types of events throughout the world, but those just hitting a few to demonstrate that it has touched every faith of our community. And I probably left out some faiths that I did not include that have also been victims of attacks or hate. But I just mentioned those few to highlight the importance of coming together and wanting to thank this organization for being the catalyst to do so and to have these discussions. When we look and assess and we investigate and we try to learn events that led up to something that was a violation of federal law, whether it's a hate crime or a actual attack on people in a facility or a religion, we're looking at what were those motivators? What were the indicators? Were there things in that person's life? Did they have affiliations? Were they part of a group? Were they not part of a group? Was there mental illness potentially where they had a break and acted? Many would argue that anybody who could do such an evil thing would have to have some form of mental illness to do that to another human being in the first place. But nonetheless, the reality is that there are some people who belong to extremist ideologies that target and want to destroy and attack other people and religions. And we've seen it throughout the world. So our job is to try to understand that as best we can. And if we put the last 2 years into a contextual framework, we've seen people reacting in ways to things that we would have never imagined. Conspiracy theories on COVID-19 and tying that to religion. Political extremism tied to religion. Religion extremism tied to foreign policy and the rescuing of refugees out of a very hostile wartime environment for 20 years and trying to do the right thing to take care of those folks who need safety and refuge, now tied to some sort of extremist ideology that's targeting religion. And so, you know, people who are in the business of ideological extremism and hate can find any catalyst to make sense out of their motivations. And we're in this place in this day and age where having that wide aperture to understand and to look at the world around us when things occur, how that impacts us here at home. And not just in the United States, but in your community and in your church or your synagogue or your mosque. All of those things that are happening throughout the world can be distilled down into your microclimate of your religious home and how that might impact you in some way. And so we really try to encourage through these conversations and these symposiums through our partnerships with our federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies to encourage people to have a plan, to rehearse that plan, just like you would any other plan. And, you know, just 2-3 years ago, I was in the office down in coastal Georgia, in Savannah and Brunswick, and we did a lot of these in person at various different religious centers throughout the coastal region. And I used to draw the parallel of what we do to prepare for hurricanes down there. People buy food, they buy water, they buy things to secure their homes, they have gas in the car, they have a plan, they have an evacuation route, they know exactly where to go, they have a destination. And the same holds true for planning for these types of events. And unfortunately, in our society, this has become common, where when most of us on this call were growing up in elementary school, we would practice the fire drill or the tornado drill. Well, now in schools, it's very common that they have active shooter drills. And what does it mean to go into lockdown? And they have color codes. And it's just a, you know, it is just the reality of the world we live in that we have to be prepared for. And I think I'm going to try to address a little bit of the question about discernment. I think that is where good planning comes into place. Most of the folks that I know who spend a lot of time in this business of doing vulnerability assessments and threat assessments in this space, whether you're talking about schools or hospitals or houses of worship, each one of those has a unique environment that must be addressed and has unique requirements. And so envelopes of security and envelopes of surveillance and envelopes of protection all kind of feed into this planning cycle. And so naturally, your warmth and your desire to open your doors to take care of others is what defines good in our world. You know, we are so grateful that we have all of the different faiths who seek to take care of others. And your desire to do that while trying to triage and assess the needs of someone who's coming in who may not be known or may be a stranger is something very hard to define. And I've seen it in various houses of worship that I've been to, even here in the Atlanta area, where you walk in and they have every walk of life, every race, every socioeconomic class, you name it, every type of individual is in this house of worship. And it's really quite a beautiful thing. But there are probably people who are there who may even be homeless and may have mental illness, and they don't know, but they give all of them a place to worship together. Now, in that same space, I've also seen very, very strict envelopes of surveillance and security of some of their team members that are keeping an eye on behaviors, looking for indicators, putting themselves in between someone who may be acting peculiar to ensure that there's a buffer, and giving themselves an opportunity to have a more proactive engagement with that person before they get too far into maybe the larger sanctuary areas where many more parishioners may be located. But, you know, that takes a lot of effort. It takes volunteers. It takes training. And so, again, that all goes into that planning process that's so important. But I just wanted to add those few thoughts while I'm here serving in this acting special agent in charge capacity until we get a new special agent in charge in the coming months. And thank you so much for having us. And I'd be free to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Agent Whistler. Next we have, let's see, next up would be
Reverend Flippin.
Jessica, thank you so much. I just wanted to just rephrase my question. I want to be very clear that I'm not anti-police. I think that it's so important that we educate all brothers and sisters, as we're doing so eloquently here, that the police profession is an honorable profession. It is one that I believe that they're more good policing and than bad, but because of the documented history, particularly among African American men, and I say that, you know, very humbly, but just and we're not the only persons who have been brutalized by police, at least filmed. Well, you go with George Floyd, Rodney King 30 years ago. Is how do we, you know, continue to work together? And believe you me, I'm an advocate of this, particularly to educate all Abrahamic brothers and sisters to, you know, change their perceptions, even if meeting police or shaking their head, that is not just if somebody you think they're following you or something, just to meet the police, great police officers. And I think that will change the perceptions, you know, elementary schools and building the partnership, and we can lead it as faith leaders, as Abrahamic brothers and sisters. So that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So I can't speak, you know, to every member of every faith community in Atlanta.
Right.
It's just not possible.
Right.
But what I hope is that you all carry the message that we talk about tonight, that when you have conversations with those in your community and you talk about law enforcement, that you bring up the conversations that we had tonight. You bring up this call, you bring up the message that we've provided, and that hopefully it's through you that that comfort level is built with law enforcement.
Yes. Thank you, Alexis.
Sir, if I can add something as well. We do have a speakers bureau, and as Isaac Santiago said, they can't go obviously to every house of worship throughout the state of Georgia, but we can do things like a town hall where we're gathering individuals at a larger number. That way we are meeting and sort of tailoring it down so that you're not going to say 50, but you're going to one place that draws those 50. So if you're interested in doing something of that nature, please feel free to reach out to me, and we can start discussing a possible town hall or some other options that you may be interested in.
Thank you, Denise.
You're welcome.
Okay, our next question is, recently in Washington, D.C., pro-choice advocates shined a message outside the Basilica, during Mass, which is unprecedented. Protesters also berated churchgoers at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. My fear is that this will continue to escalate. Is this on the FBI's radar?
Ooh. sit on the FBI's radar? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're aware that the threats, not just to religious communities, to minority groups, different racial groups, are ever evolving. If there's a particular threat, I'm not going to speak to that because I don't know those events in detail. But if going back to the threats, if we're aware of a certain threat against one of those communities here in the Atlanta area, we're going to have conversations with those communities. And that's really all I can say. If we're aware of the threat, we can begin conversations and be able to provide an opportunity for you all to figure out what posture you need to take with your community. And at the same time, hopefully help us advance our investigation into the threat.
Thank you. And the last question that we have in the chat right now is, are there advocacy issues that our different faith traditions can be working on in this regard? How can we advocate?
I think that's a question probably for the group as a whole, for the interfaith group.
Does anyone have any comments to that? Any suggestions?
I'll maybe expand a little bit on the question, and that was, are there specific issues that may be necessary to get voters or to make voters aware of around these issues, things that the FBI is looking for to make legislative changes?
Yeah, so we're strictly a law enforcement organization. We certainly try to stay away from politics as much as we possibly can, to include trying to influence laws here and there. So I don't know, it really is kind of a non-answer to your question. I'm sorry, but yeah, we just, again, we're a law enforcement
I'm gonna take
organization.
the video off for a minute. I'm gonna show you this question.
That's fair.
We have a question here from an Interfaith Atlanta member. What proactive strategies and/or best practices can faith leaders employ at their places of worship to mitigate threats and/or active shooter situations at hand? In a nutshell,
Yes.
what can leaders do to avert or mitigate the impact of a large tragedy?
Yeah, so I was on a call about a week ago with Neil Rabinovitz and his folks, and it sounds like you have a lot of very talented security personnel that already work for your organizations. They implement trainings as well. And as Mr. Whistler said earlier, preparation, right? So seek out those trainings that are offered within your community and prepare. Have the answer to the question of what happens if someone comes to my door and their intentions are not good. And the only way to get those procedures solidified is by getting training and rehearsing. You know, give it a shot. Have someone pose as a role player and go through those rehearsals so that you're prepared for those type of engagements.
Alex, I'll add on to that question just for a second. And I think the approach to each organization has to be tailored based on your community. And I'll clarify what I mean by that. There are, if you brought this up in a larger forum at your respective houses of worship, it would probably put a fear in many of your parishioners who might be paralyzed by even having the conversation. That's not the approach you want, because you don't want to paralyze your membership to the point where they are walking in fear every time they come to worship. That's not what the house is meant to be for them. And so I think, you know, again, at the leadership level, that's where the conversation begins, because the leaderships of your respective organizations understand and know your community better than anyone, and who's coming into that house of worship week after week, night after night, and understanding the folks that are in your organizations that are also leaders that you can have a smaller group conversation with about how do we develop a proactive strategy to even table these discussions with our members so we can better protect them. And then you shape that message for your entity that is appropriate for them. I think that's something that oftentimes folks don't think too clearly about because they're so focused on the planning and the preparation piece, which is the end state, is to have your organization get to a point where you have a plan that is rehearsable and executable. But to get there and to get everybody on the place where they can respond to what you need them to do to better protect them, how that is messaged and how that is communicated cannot be underscored enough, because it will shape kind of the culture in your organization to a degree that brings everybody to a heightened state of awareness. So the goal is to kind of be in this point where people are aware, they're paying attention to the environment, but it almost becomes automatic to the point where when they know something doesn't feel right, they can sense it and they're not afraid to talk to somebody about it or tell them. And then that way your plan might have those people identified in a smaller group to actually respond to whatever that concern of that parishioner may be. But I just wanted to emphasize the importance of effective communication with your organization so that you don't get out over your skis enough in the front end to where now it's, and naturally, I mean, for the adult population, I mean, a lot of us see these things and we're inundated with things that stoke fear in us every single day. But that's part of what they want. That's part of how they win, is to paralyze our ability to function in our lives as normal. So, and listen, everybody on this call, and usually most folks in the service to your organization, such as you are dynamic and effective and impassioned and empathetic communicators. It's part of your gift. And so I just implore you to lean on that gift and how you develop these approaches with your organizations going forward.
If I could offer up to Kat Doyle's advocacy issues for all phase, there is the nonprofit security grant program. And that's something that all of us, perhaps as faith institutions, can be in touch with our elected leaders to advocate for increased funding for nonprofit security grants that can help us harden our target, harden us, and better train us with monies that are available. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobson. Do you have contact information for that agency or organization, or is just look it up?
I think nonprofit security grant program, and Neil Rabinovitz's name has been mentioned a couple of times. He has that information when it comes to the Jewish community. The Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta Secure Community Network is the central address for that for us. And I know he would be very open to sharing the direct information.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or comments?
I actually have a question. So I'm part of Shia Smiley Muslim community. Number one, thank you for Interfaith Atlanta for organizing this call. Very, very important and informative. So I really want to get into the tactics, right? So we've taken some steps to enhance our physical security when it comes to external perimeters. So we have install shatterproof film on our doors and windows and keypads. So one button and all the exterior doors would get locked and things like that, right? But just wondering, is there, can we reach out to local law enforcement or someone from your team to come and visit our facilities to see what else can we do? Are we following the best practices? Is there a list of things that we should be doing? How do we confirm that, if there are gaps, how can we fill those gaps?
Yeah, so the FBI doesn't do those type of assessments. I would defer you to your local law enforcement organizations. And then Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think DHS has a unit that may do that.
You're absolutely correct. And that's what they're going to discuss on the 22nd, because they do assessments for houses of worship. They will come out and do everything that you just described in your question.
Thank you.
Denise, can you put your information in the chat for us, please?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
In fact, we'd love to have everybody on the call put their information, their email addresses in the chat in the event that we have a follow-up, and just so we can have you on our mailing list to let you know what Interfaith Atlanta is doing on a continual basis to bring our communities together.
Any other comments or concerns, questions for our guest speakers or anybody else here listening?
I do have one more, and that would be we as an organization, Interfaith Atlanta, gathered together and had a fall festival just recently where we were outdoors with a lot of different people from different faith traditions. Is there anything that you might, any advice you might give us when we're holding these interfaith gatherings, especially in places outdoors where there might not be the normal indoor security? Just some things we might want to be aware of.
Yes, thanks for bringing that up, Kat. And just as a point of interest, that we actually ourselves hired a security firm. We had 2 people who were there the whole time, but it really came out of our coffers, which we don't have a lot of, and would love to know if that's within the realm of what the FBI and law enforcement's willing to do on behalf of community engagement and protection, so that we aren't having to pay a private firm.
Yeah, so, and again, doesn't really fall into the FBI's lane as far as providing security for events. And unfortunately, it sounds like, you're just going to have to probably look to those organizations that hire out those services, and the local law enforcement agencies or the officers that actually work those events as well. But yeah, it's something we don't do.
So any advice, as Kat Doyle from the Archdiocese is asking, any advice for steps we take other than to have security on hand?
Yeah, that would be probably the advice I would take. So definitely hire security, and then refer to your own security folks that do have an intel apparatus. They have the ability to pull intelligence from the other faith communities. Probably rely on that.
And I will add something there, Alex, just real quick. Kind of going back towards having that wide aperture open, and understanding what's happening around the country, the region, the world, and how well advertised is this event that you've put on. And then starting to look at, and as Alex was definitely making reference to, the intelligence organizations kind of within the faith-based community that share a lot of information. They're very good. they are very effective, and they pay very close attention to what's happening and what's being messaged that may be targeting respective faiths throughout the world and throughout the country. So I think understanding that and knowing that in advance of an event is really important, because you may see, and as we have seen on several occasions, the probability of having a vehicle-borne attack in an outside event probably goes up compared towards maybe something else. And we've seen those techniques employed in various parts of the world and in the country to target outdoor events or parades or festivals. Just using that as an example, as an attack vector that, we didn't expect to see that at some point until it happened. And then we started seeing it happen over and over because it was effective and it worked. So looking at those types of challenges based on the environment in which your function is occurring is really important, because some environments are going to be more applicable or valuable with a certain type of approach than others. And again, I think your engagement with security personnel, however that is decided to be employed, and who those people are, will definitely impact their ability to make those assessments on the ground.
Thank you, everyone who's put your information so far into the chat. If you haven't yet, please enter it over there. We can follow up with you that way. We'll add you to our news list. And also, if there's any further questions or answers that need to be disseminated amongst us, then I can send those out. Any other comments, questions?
I do have one last question, and it's a little bit different. A lot of our faith communities deal with human trafficking issues. And while Homeland Security does most of that work, the FBI has been involved in joint work with Homeland Security on that. Is there anything you'd like to say about that kind of work that's being done here in the Atlanta area?
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely work human trafficking issues. And so again, like, reach out to us, and we can also provide presentations on human trafficking. We have experts in that area, and our supervisor does a great presentation on human trafficking specifically. So if that's something that interests you, let Denise Taste know. We can coordinate that for you.
Great. Anyone else?
I think we can express our gratitude to all the different faith leaders, both lay leaders and professional leaders, and of course to the FBI for calling this assembly, for attending this gathering. It just really shows strength and unity, and our common humanity, irrespective of our traditions and our practices and our languages. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you. And we're just honored to be here tonight. Thanks for inviting us. And I hope that this is one of many conversations that we can have moving forward. So thank you so much for having us this evening.
Yes, thank you, especially Mr. Santiago, Ms. Taste, Mr. Whistler, for your time, your perspective, your wisdom. I hope that we've all learned from this experience and will continue to make necessary steps to strengthen our relationships between our communities and law enforcement, just for the safety of everyone. A special thank you again to all who have attended this evening. We appreciate you taking the time out of your weeks to join us in this community building mission. Please look for more events and educational programming sponsored by Interfaith Atlanta as we continue to grow. We're filling up our calendar for this year, so we look forward to seeing you and your friends, family, colleagues at all of our events. You can find us on our website, interfaithatlanta.org, or like us on Facebook for the most up-to-date information. So have a great night, everyone, and a great rest of your week. Goodbye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.